You've chosen your dream destination and mapped out your plans. You've booked accommodation, a couple of tours, and your bags are packed. There's nothing better than the anticipation before a big trip. Until that excitement gets interrupted.
Breaking right now, the State Department has now issued a worldwide caution alert.
The State Department is warning tourists about increasing crime rates. The agency raised its travel advisory level to increased caution.
Tonight, two of the most beautiful destinations in the Caribbean now clouded by a stark warning from the U.S. government amid a rise in violent crime.
It's easy to get spooked by what you hear on the news, and sometimes it can even derail the best laid travel plans. But what do travel advisories really mean? Do you just need to exercise a little extra caution? Or should you cancel your trip altogether? Well, before you unpack those bags, it's helpful to understand what these travel advisories are actually communicating. So today, we're here to help you make sense of the travel advisory system. I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest, Jessica Fender. She is a seasoned travel writer who contributes to the Ask the Traveler column in Westways and AAA Explorer magazine. She recently wrote a column on making sense of advisories, and this is such an important topic. So welcome back to the show. You've been with us many times, Jessica.
Hi, yes, it's so great to be back. Thanks for having me, Angie.
So to start, what is a travel advisory and who issues them?
Travel advisories can be a little tough to understand. They're issued by the U.S. State Department, and they go from a level 1 to a level 4, 1 being exercise normal precaution, or do not travel is level 4, and that's for the places with ongoing conflict, that type of thing.
And so the State Department of the U.S. issues these.
That is a fabulous question. Yes. And so that is one of the things that I think is so critical when you're trying to determine whether or not it's safe to travel is you have to do your reading. You have to read up. I know nobody likes to hear it. We'd love to just have the simple answer, but there are several other bodies that also assess risk in different travel destinations. And my favorite is the United Kingdom's Foreign and Commonwealth Office. They just offer a lot more detail in the advice that they give their travelers. For me, having the most info makes me feel the safest. I know what to avoid while I'm in the country, and there are a ton of resources out there. I would just caution people to not just look at the top line and let that ruin your trip.
What are the risk factors? Like really specifically, what are they looking for?
One of the most common warnings is related to crime. And, everyone has a different tolerance for that. I happen to live in a big city. For me, I'm used to walking around doing things like protecting my belongings, but maybe someone who is from the burbs or a more remote area, maybe that's something that's scary for you. Another big one might be unrest. Sometimes you'll be in a destination and there's some tensions or the locals are protesting the government. There's also health-related risks, and here is where it's great to start with the State Department, but you're definitely going to want to check out the CDC travel notices as well, so the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. When it comes to these threats, it's not only the threat itself, it can also be that the country just doesn't have a great response to it. If there's a health outbreak, the country doesn't have the resources to take care of that. So you need to read up and kind of gauge what your personal comfort level is with some of these things.
I think we see level 3 advisory and maybe instantly go to, absolutely no, I can't travel there. It's illegal to travel there. It's the most dangerous place in the world. And maybe that's not the case. So let's talk a little bit about the different levels. There's levels 1 to 4 from U.S. State Department advisories. So what does that mean?
Level 1 is sort of an exercise normal precaution that has to do with anytime you're traveling anywhere. That's like, I'm going to Disney World, exercise normal precaution, right? Or I'm going to San Diego, exercise normal precaution. Level 2 is the increased risk. That's not really as bad as it sounds. Increased risk, most countries are under that warning. Basically, the federal government doesn't want to be like, hey, it's totally safe to go everywhere, right? Because they want to put in your mind that you need to be conscientious as you're traveling. It's a little bit dicier at level 3. That's a reconsider travel warning. And I feel like level 3 is probably the one that folks have the most trouble with. And when you see a level 3, what it really means is you need to do some reading. You need to understand the city you're going to. How does that impact it specifically? Not the country as a whole, because there are a lot of places where main tourist destinations are okay or relatively okay. But if you get out into rural areas or areas where there's a shared border, you can start running into problems.
So the advisories don't necessarily mean you can't or shouldn't travel. If you see an advisory, the idea with that is read more, learn more, be prepared, right?
Yes. Please tailor your travel plans accordingly. I can give a recent example. I was taking a group trip to Colombia, and Colombia is listed as a level 3 destination. So I dug in. I went and I looked at the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office warnings, and I saw, there's a kidnapping issue, but that's mostly in rural areas where the drug cartel is very active, right? Cartagena, where I was going, nowhere near those areas. The Rosario Islands, where I was going, nowhere near those areas. I did see that street crime was an issue. And, I live in New Orleans. Here, street crime is an issue. Many big cities, street crime is an issue. It's not too hard to take steps to make sure you're not a target, as long, as you know that you need to take those steps. So I left jewelry at home. I didn't bring my nice jewelry with me. I carried one credit card. I carried limited cash. I utilized the hotel safe. Look, there for a reason. And all of that, we had a lovely trip.
So another place that Americans in particular ask about all the time is Mexico. You're going to find so many opinions on if it's okay to go to Mexico or not, and is it responsible to talk about going to Mexico? So what do you think of that? What's your take?
I have been to Mexico so many times. I'm actually going in a couple of weeks. I have never had a bad time. I've never had an issue with safety, but I'm also going to states in Mexico that are set up for tourists. So it's even easier to get good information about Mexico because the State Department, like our State Department, issues state-by-state warnings for Mexico. So, you think about Cancun and Tulum, and that's in Quintana Roo. Totally fine. That's a level 2. That's a just regular run-of-the-mill advisory. Yucatan, same thing. A lot of the Pacific Coast, same thing. Sinaloa, okay, that's a level 4. Maybe don't go to Sinaloa. Just be smart. It's just like in the United States. There are places that you can go and be safe, and there's places you can go where you're going to be at risk. And it just takes a little research, a little education.
I think that's a really good point to kind of look at it on a state by state basis. You can't paint Mexico with such a broad brush. Mexico is not level 4. Mexico is 1 to 4, and it just depends where you're going. Frequent flyers might want to consider one of 2 government-run trusted traveler programs that can take the hassle out of airport security screenings. For both TSA PreCheck and Global Entry, federal agencies run background checks on applicants and issue known traveler numbers to those who are deemed low risk. Domestic travelers with TSA PreCheck get to use shorter lines at checkpoints, keep their shoes on, and leave liquids and electronics in their bags at more than 200 U.S. airports. It costs $78 and is valid for 5 years. Global Entry comes with all those perks. Plus, it allows international travelers to bypass the usual passport control lines when they re-enter the U.S. It costs $100. Like TSA PreCheck, Global Entry privileges are valid for 5 years before you need to renew. Application processing times for Global Entry can be significant. Once pre-approved, Globetrotters can interview at enrollment centers around the U.S. or at dozens of airports when they re-enter the U.S. I want to dive into the Caribbean because this is one that recently came about. Within the past few months, they upped the advisories in Jamaica and the Bahamas, and people wanted to cancel their honeymoons and really just not go there on a cruise. And when you dig down, you find that it's very specific areas. So do you have thoughts on the Caribbean specifically?
I am so glad you asked this question. This is one, when I saw the change come across, I was like, oh, people are really going to freak out over this. And it's not a freak out thing. We'll just take Jamaica, for instance. A highway divides all of the beach resorts, all of the tourist areas from the rest of Montego Bay. And inland from that highway is a little sketchy, like you should be careful. Toward the water from that line, it's kind of business as usual for Jamaica. That is one of those things where it pays to have a good travel advisor. It just pays to have somebody who can help you navigate that a little bit. I would point out that with Jamaica, for instance, the advisory is related to violent crime. And that's awful, right? But a big part of that is also that people who find themselves subject to violent crime don't get results from the local government because the local government's not doing much to curb that, right? So it's not just that there's crime, because there's crime everywhere. It's that if you're the victim of a crime, they might not be following up the way you're accustomed to back home.
What we saw sort of in the news was Jamaica, Bahamas, the most dangerous place in the world. And really nothing could be further from the truth. I'm very familiar with the Bahamas. There's a small area that is experiencing violent crime, and the country is many hundreds of square miles and 700 islands. And, all the other islands also rely on tourism. So it's very important when you're choosing where to go to get the full picture.
I couldn't agree more. And as a frequent traveler, it does hurt your heart a little bit to see these scares come out. And I got to say, I am a journalist, but I can also recognize that a scarier headline is going to get more clicks. So you got to read to the end. I will also point out that other countries offer specific travel advisories against coming to the United States for things like gun violence or for LGBTQIA travelers, because, there are places in this country where we've got some unsafe ideas about certain groups, certain communities. So every country is going to have its problems. It's just that we know our problems more, right? So we have to get to know their problems.
So where should people start? What website should they use? What's reliable?
For sure, the State Department, that's the place to get started. And if you see something on there that gets you thinking, I don't know, that feels a little weird to me, there are other sites. Like I had mentioned a little earlier, the United Kingdom's Foreign and Commonwealth Office offers detailed reports. There's OSAC, the Overseas Security Advisory Council, another great spot to get more in-depth information. Certain travelers are going to want to be a little more conscientious depending on where they're going. Like we were talking about LGBTQIA travelers. Equaldex is one of the places that I would recommend. And surprisingly, I have found that university websites have great resources for travel advisories for all sorts of groups, because, they're sending kids to go study abroad all the time, and they really take responsibility to sort of get them ready. And that kind of surprised me, but I would recommend taking a look around there as well.
Okay, so I want your opinion on this. There's the quote from Nat Geo. It says, travel advisories can be biased. Research found that while the U.S. didn't often overstate the risk of travel to countries with which it has poor relations, it did often understate the danger of visiting nations that were its close allies. What do you think about that?
I could not agree more. That is 100% true. Our government has a vested interest in maintaining good relationships with certain countries, and that influences their opinion or the public statements that they make. On the other side of that, that also probably means they have good relations with that destination or that country. So if something should happen, they'll have an easier time helping you. Some of these advisories, some of the things that I mentioned earlier, it's not just that, there's a health risk or, there's a crime risk. It's that also the U.S. doesn't have great relationships with the governments of the countries that you're visiting, and it could be a little tougher to get you help.
What are some safety tips for navigating destinations where there may be travel advisories in place? What do you think?
There are some certain steps that we can take in general to be a little bit safer when we travel. If you don't know the language or if you're traveling solo, maybe stay at a hotel with a bilingual staff, some form of security in an area where there are going to be other foreign tourists. I kind of look at it like solo hiking. I want to be around other people on the trail. I want to make sure the trail's safe, and I want to make sure people know where I am and are kind of keeping an eye out for me. And for me, I find that hotels seem to be a little bit more of a reliable home base than a place like, an Airbnb that might be in a neighborhood that's just outside of the main strip, or just outside of a place where maybe it's a dead zone at night. So that's one of the things that I always do. I also take advantage of the in-room safe because I don't want to be carrying my stuff out with me. There are some countries where you are required to carry your passport with you at all times. If I'm not in one of those countries, that thing goes in the safe immediately. So do my backup credit card and anything else that's of value, my electronics, that kind of thing. Another thing that I really like to do that ends up being not only a safer experience, but like a better tourism experience is hire a guide. People may think it's cost prohibitive, but not only do you get a lot more out of all of your day trips, you have somebody there who knows the language, who knows what to do in an emergency, who knows how to call 911 if you turn an ankle on a trail. It's not only helps you to have a little extra security, but it's a better experience. And honestly, I'm friends with several of my guides. So I've got friends in Morocco and Cuba and all over the world now because I hired guides. Jordan just made friends.
They have great guides in Jordan.
Oh gosh, truly one of my all-time favorite trips. And it was because of my guide. Yeah, he did such a great job.
A guide can really be helpful. Not only do they know the best food and where to get it, they can also say, hey, I wouldn't go over there at night. Or if you do, I'll go with you. Or they just have all those sort of insider tips. It's a really good, just safe bet, especially if you're in a new place that you're just not familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who is famous for missing buses and trains and that type of thing, they also know how long is it going to take to get to the train station? When do you need to leave by? So much of our travel logistics, travel issues can be handled if we just find a really good in-country guide for, at least a couple days.
Do you recommend that people register for the STEP program?
I always do. So the STEP program, for anyone who doesn't know, it stands for the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. It's run by the State Department. You sign up before you leave the country, and you will just get any updated travel advisory, any immediate warning. Maybe there's a natural disaster or something like that. You're going to get texts about that to your phone while you're traveling so you can take immediate steps to make sure that you're safe.
The general gist of all of this is be prepared. Take every bit of information you can get. Take it with a grain of salt. Use all the tools at your disposal.
And use your common sense. Just be aware of your surroundings and just exercise regular safety measures you would if you were going to be in, LA or New York or wherever.
Absolutely. Just be prepared to exercise every little travel tip, whether you're at home or abroad. You're never going to go wrong with good resources. Speaking of good resources, you can find links to the STEP program and all of the travel advisory websites that were mentioned in today's episode in the show notes. Jessica Fender, thank you for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for being with us. If you're planning a trip, be sure to connect with a AAA travel advisor. Check out AAA.com/travel or visit your local branch. This podcast is a production of Auto Club Enterprises. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a review. I'm Angie Orth. Thank you for traveling with AAA.